Okay, folks, so let's get this show on the road. This is the Oregon Realtors training on the updates that are happening to Oregon law 696 through House Bill 3137. By way of explanation, 3137 was a House bill that went through in 2025's legislative session. It's what you would probably describe as an omnibus bill that modifies quite a few parts of ORS 696. ORS 696 is the chapter that applies to real estate licensees. So this is the chapter that affects all the stuff having to do with real estate licenses, property management, timeshares, that kind of thing. It does not have an emergency clause. So House Bill 3137, all of the stuff we talk about goes into effect January 1st, 2026. That's the baseline to the effective date. The primary and first change that is really happening in House Bill 3136 or 3137 rather is modification to, it's a new definition in the terms section. So 696010 is all the definitions. It's the stuff that defines professional real estate activity, what is a broker, what is a principal broker, that sort of thing. In addition to all of that, there is now a new term, managing principal broker. This is defined as an individual who is a principal real estate broker and who has registered or assumed responsibility for a business name under this chapter. Previously, the statute just defined principal real estate broker and just used that term all over. And so a great example is the 696280, which says, the old language was a licensed real estate property manager or principal real estate broker shall maintain within this state, except as provided in subsection, complete and adequate records of all real estate activity conducted by and through their real estate principal broker. Because the term defined principal real estate broker as just a person who has taken and passed the principal real estate education and also gotten the principal broker's license, it meant that there were quite a few instances where portions of the law that applied directly to business ownership and the management of a business just said this is something that all principal brokers have to do. And what has happened over the last probably 30 years or so is there has been a growth in the number of principal brokers who are not running their own companies, but rather are brokers associated with another brokerage who also happen to be principal brokers at the same time, but are not independently running a company. And so this new term, managing principal broker, has been added to all of 696, kind of all throughout the entire chapter. Whenever there is the use of the term principal broker in previous ways that the chapter was written, that's really just a reference to someone who is running a company, it now says managing principal broker. There's no new license category. You don't have to apply for a managing principal broker's license. Rather, if you are a principal broker and you have registered a business, or you are in charge of a business through some sort of an assumed control agreement, you are a managing principal broker, and portions of the chapter of law that say this applies to the managing principal broker will apply to you. Whereas if you only have a principal broker's license and you are not managing a company, there are portions of the chapter that will no longer apply to you. They are just kind of business regulation rules, and those will not be effective. So for instance, 696280 has been modified, so it now says a licensed property manager or a managing principal broker has to maintain records of the professional real estate activities. So if you are a professional or a principal real estate broker, you just have the license, but you are not running a company, you no longer Mary Early is asking, is this a designated? Yeah, it's essentially the same concept as designated principal broker. There is no concept, designated principal broker is not something defined within a chapter. So it's the same idea broadly, is not exactly a one-to-one, but for our purposes, it's probably easiest to understand that is what managing principal broker means is just largely the person that's running the company. And so there are certain rules that apply to the person running the company and certain rules that will apply to just principal brokers writ large. So for example, any principal broker could in theory become a managing principal broker. If you register a company, congratulations, you're now a managing principal broker because you registered the company. And so there are still rules that will say just this applies to principal brokers in general, but many of the places that previously the law was kind of abstract or uncertain, it now says managing principal broker if it only refers to the business owner or the person that is running the company. So that is all throughout 696. There is a change to the continuing education standards. So previously there was a 3-hour LARC and fair housing requirement. Basically, it was that was a result of I believe it was 2021 2021 was when maybe it was 2023. Relatively recently, there was a modification to the law that said also, in addition to doing LARC, the law and rule required course, you have to do fair housing. Federal and state fair housing laws must be covered. That was all kind of bundled into one concept. So the LARC course was sort of eaten over by fair housing, and a 3-hour LARC course ended up being like an hour of LARC and really more like 2 hours of fair housing in addition to that, because NAR has a separate requirement that you do 2 hours of fair housing. So when the Oregon Real Estate Agency said you need to do 3 hours, and in those 3 hours you need to cover all of our LARC stuff and fair housing, what we found is you could easily just accomplish NAR's thing by doing 2 hours of fair housing and then also throw the LARC on top and fill out the last hour with that. That was not seen as ideal, so what we're doing instead under this law is it says 2-hour course that covers LARC and a 2-hour course that covers fair housing. The two things are now separate. And so whereas in 2024-25 you could theoretically have a LARC class that got you both your NAR fair housing and the LARC requirement covered simultaneously, you would get a state continuing education requirement checked and a membership requirement checked through NAR. Now that's no longer the case. There will still be a fair housing course that you can do that will cover your state requirement, and it'll also cover NAR's requirement, but that is separate and different from the LARC course. So just be aware into the future, there are now 4 hours of required CE. It's part of that 30 hours that you have to do each time, but it is 2 separate 2-hour courses rather than one 3-hour course that covers both of those concepts. If people have questions at any point as well, we have the chat up, and so you can put questions in the chat. There are some additional changes that are required for what training is going to happen in a first-time renewal. So to renew an active license for the first time, or to reactivate a license for the first time after the license was renewed from an inactive status, a real estate licensee shall pass an assessment of licensee proficiency in a manner approved by the real estate agency. So we have yet to see what this exactly will look like. OREA is still kind of in the process. I have a slide much later on that says, hey guys, OREA is doing its rulemaking. We have a rulemaking session for public comment that's coming up soon. If you have thoughts, you can go in there and let OREA know. But essentially, we have yet to see what this proficiency assessment is going to look like. OREA is going to produce it. The idea behind this, though, is that if you are a new licensee, you've just gotten your real estate license, at some point within that renewal period, you're going to take an assessment that does more practical skills questions. So along the lines of like, can you fill out a contract, that kind of thing. And so there's going to be an assessment that essentially asks for practical proficiency skills as part of your renewal of a license after like beginning in the industry. There are changes to real estate teams. This one is one of the larger changes. There is a new section added to 696. It does not, I believe it doesn't have a number yet. It hasn't been numerated under 696. It's just section 13 of House Bill 3137, but it will at some point in the near future be added to 696 under some chapter subheading 696, 226, 220, whatever, they'll add it somewhere. But we don't have a number for it yet. And this modifies and regulates real estate teams. So to begin with, when we say real estate team, under the way that this is defined, a real estate team is a subdivision of a registered business that performs professional real estate activities and is comprised of one or more real estate licensees that are operating under a name other than the registered business name. So you register your business with OREA, congratulations, it has been authorized to do professional real estate activity under the name you have registered with OREA. If you have a group running through a business that is using a name other than the one registered with OREA, that is a real estate team under the definition in Oregon law. It essentially means if there is an administrative subdivision of your real estate company that is calling itself a different name, ABC team is part of XYZ brokerage. If that team is operating and doing professional real estate activity under that name that is different than the registered name, they're a team, all these rules will apply. Scroll up a little bit. The real estate team, subsection 2, it's upon approval by a managing principal broker, some or all associated real estate licensees in a main office or branch office may form a real estate team. What that essentially means is the team is something that is created with the approval of the managing principal broker. It's not something that just kind of happens organically. It is something that requires approval from the person who has registered the business name. Question in chat: since House Bill 3137 defines a team as one or more licensees, do you think OREA will emphasize that even individual licensees using a separate brand name are covered by these restrictions? I believe I don't know if they're going to emphasize it, but that is what this essentially says, is if someone is running a solo, like a team can be a one-person team. If you are a licensee running by doing professional real estate activity under a name that is not the registered name, even if you're just one person, because you are operating real estate outside of the name that is registered with OREA, that is a team and is regulated under this. What if you have a registered DBA that matches up with the advertised team name? So that is a separate question, but and this is more of a question of kind of what it means to have a registered business. Presumably, and we await to see what OREA's official opinions on this are. But at this stage, when 696 describes a registered business, it is referring to something that's been registered with OREA, because 696 is OREA's chapter of the law. Generally, it's not saying registered with the Secretary of State. And so a DBA is registered with the Secretary of State, not with OREA. Now, in theory, OREA's rulemaking could say if your company, if your brokerage has a DBA, that's fine, we count that as a registered business, but OREA hasn't made that rule yet, and so we don't have any guidance to provide beyond that. So at the present moment, the broad kind of typical interpretation of this statute would be when we say registered business, we mean registered with OREA specifically, and a DBA would not be something that's counted under OREA's registry, because OREA doesn't have DBAs. That's the Secretary of State function only at this stage. It is something where, if that is a thought, I would encourage you to contact OREA or like to attend the public comment making and make that comment and say something to the effect of, it'd be really cool if a company that had a DBA could also, have teams that are operating under that DBA, because then it is registered somewhere rather than having the registration only be through OREA's systems itself, which really only refers to like starting a company with OREA. So. At some stage in the near-ish future, I believe OREA will produce a form that provides disclosures that are required by the team. So the team, when they enter into a written representation agreement with a client or a listing agreement with a client, a member of the team needs to provide a disclosure that explains a bunch of stuff. It explains the name and role of all the people on the team. It explains whether the individual members of the team are real estate licensees or not. It explains that the name of the managing principal broker with whom they are all associated. So like, where does the buck stop? Who's in charge of the actual like brokerage this team is operating out of? And it requires a statement to the effect that the real estate team must have a disclosed limited agency agreement in place before any members of the real estate team may perform professional real estate activity for a buyer or seller when they already represent someone else in that transaction. Essentially what this says is a team is treated as a single entity. If the team is working with someone, the team is working with someone. All people of that team are working with that someone. And so if a team is going to operate as a disclosed limited agent, they're going to represent the buyer and the seller, then the team needs some sort of a disclosed limited agency agreement that covers everyone within that team, and there's going to be a disclosure that essentially states that stuff. Now, OREA will presumably create a disclosure document for this. It's supposed to be established in a manner established by OREA. We'll have it. But in the present sense, we're still waiting to see what OREA produces in the rulemaking. But there will be a form provided by the agency that has this exact disclosure information. To clarify, Deanna asks, to clarify, do you need to list unlicensed team members with their roles or just the licensees? You need to include people who are unlicensed within the team as well, and their role, as well as whether or not the person is licensed. So if you have a team that has 3 people who are team members, who are all licensees, and 2 unlicensed assistants who specifically work with that team, the team would be comprised of all 5 individuals, and you would provide their names and each one of their roles. as well as an explanation of these first three people have licenses. They are licensees. They will do professional real estate activity. These last two, unlicensed assistants, will not be doing professional real estate activity because that's not their role. Is it just a disclosure document or a document that requires a signature of all parties? At this stage, it is a disclosure to the client that essentially says, here is the stance of all the things that are going on, but this is something that is entered before you go into a representation agreement or a listing agreement. So while a signature is not required by all parties, if the client, buyer, seller, whoever it ends up being, reads through the thing and says, I don't like this team has too many people, or whatever it ends up being, they don't have to enter into the actual like signature on that they don't have to enter representation is the way that essentially works. So it's a disclosure, doesn't require signature, but it's something that is provided before representation is initiated. Now theoretically, OREA could put a signature bar at the bottom of that document. It happens, but it's as written in statute, it is not strictly required that it is an agreement. It is simply a disclosure. Rosie asked, I would like to clarify on the LARC and fair housing requirement. We offer LARC fair housing. We want to make sure the requirements are being met. My understanding is we would offer a 3-hour LARC that includes fair housing. That was what we could do before 3137. Now with 3137, LARC and fair housing are going to be separate concepts. There will be a 2-hour LARC rather than a 3-hour LARC, and a 2-hour fair housing rather than that being part of the 3-hour LARC. As of January 2026, yeah. So presumably with the next LARC course, which is going to be 26-27, there will be only 2 hours worth of material, and then separately a 2-hour fair housing that should happen simultaneously. The 2-hour fair housings kind of exist in the Aether already because NAR has a 2-hour requirement on fair housing that it does on its own stuff. So a lot of the NAR fair housing will likely meet the same requirements that Oregon has for its fair housing course. And so yes is the answer. Let's see, including virtual assistants. Felicia, that's a good question. If you're talking about like assistants who operate digitally and help you virtually, then yes, if they're people that are working with your team. If you're talking about the like autopilot thing that like transcribes stuff for you, that's not a member of the team. That's just a tool. So kind of depends on what you mean by virtual assistant. But if it's a human being, then yeah. Sounds like a way to disclose who is there because the team name is the only way that someone would know who's truly working for them. TCs work for the entire office. If a TC works for the entire office, there is kind of if they are operating as part of the team, if they are working with the team, I would argue that they are part of that team. If they work for the whole office, they're part of all the teams. They would be one of the people that needs to be mentioned because essentially the client, the customer, the consumer at some point is going to run into a name that they may not recognize. And this is essentially saying, just tell them who they're going to be working with. All the people that could potentially work with them, and if they're working with this team, mention all those people. Already taken 3 hours of LARC. Well, I need to take the fair housing course to renew in 2027. That is a licensing question, and I believe if you've taken LARC already, that's good for 2025. 2026, 27 will have the new cycle of LARC courses. So you will need to take the new LARC course by 2027. NAR has a 2-year thing on fair housing. So if you took LARC this year, like today, then 2 years henceforth, you'll still have to take a fair housing class again for NAR through your requirement and membership. So at least before like the end of the year 2027, you will need to have taken LARC and fair housing. Even if the admin is working as part of the brokerage itself. If the admin is working with the brokerage itself, let's hold off on that admin question. I'll try and address that at the end, but I want to kind of focus more on the team stuff because there are a couple more pieces of this that are going to be worth a fair amount of discussion or conversation. There we go. So the real estate team members must, if a real estate team member is going to supervise or control the team, they need to be a principal broker, and they're going to need a supervision and control agreement of some sort under 696.310. So if you do have a team that has someone who is in charge of the team and is exerting some sort of supervision or control, they are reviewing documents, they are doing something to the effect of controlling the team, and it's like a team leader that exerts executive control. They're supposed to be a principal broker. essentially, if you're going to be exerting control over other brokers, principal broker licensure is part of that. And a written supervisory agreement, we'll talk about that later. There's also an update to how supervision and control works. And essentially, there needs to be an agreement that says, hey, so-and-so has been authorized to supervise and control the various people within this team that is part of this brokerage that I am in charge of. So if you are going to manage a team, in theory, a team of one would be the controller here. Do they need to be PBs? If the team of one is also like independently reviewing its own documents and all those things, then yes, you would need that team of one person to be a principal broker. If the team of one person is not supervising or controlling the actions at play, then no. So if someone is exerting executive oversight, they are reviewing the documents, they are able to like direct what's supposed to be done and they are essentially what like all documentation is flowed through. Then if you're doing that and you're only one person in your own team, then you need to be a principal broker. And that principal broker will need a written supervisory agreement that basically says, I, the managing broker, authorize you, this individual one-person principal broker team, to just kind of do your own thing and manage your own part of this brokerage. Do I need to register my business as a single member LLC? It is a single member team. Can I disclose my brokerage managing principal broker as per his instructions? If your team is step back a step on this. A team is a subsection of an existing company. ABC Realty is the brokerage. ABC Realty is the one that is registered with OREA and allowed to do professional real estate activity. Everything that is not ABC Realty doesn't have the right to do professional real estate activity. Even if your team is like separately, if you've registered as an LLC or something like that, that makes it a valid company under Oregon law. That does not make it something that is registered to do professional real estate activity. So if you are operating and doing professional real estate activity through another brokerage that is registered with OREA, then you shouldn't be registering that as an LLC or trying to register that with OREA in its own right. There is a right to create an LLC under 696-290 that allows you to establish an LLC for the purpose of collecting compensation, but that compensation collecting LLC should not be the one that is doing professional real estate activity. It's just there to collect the compensation, nothing else. There's literally part of the law says it should do no professional real estate activity. It should only collect compensation. So if you do have a team that you are registered, you're like running it through your LLC and it's doing professional real estate activity, that's a problem. And it shouldn't be doing professional real estate activity. It instead should be something where the brokerage that you are associated with is allowing you to run a team within the brokerage, and that you have an LLC that just collects the compensation that is earned from the activities of your team. Is the supervisory agreement for licensed assistants who are independent contractors? We'll get to that a little later on. Supervision agreement is licensee to licensee sort of thing. It's the same thing from 696-310 that kind of existed before. That essentially, if you are an unlicensed assistant and you're working with a company, you're an employee of the company most of the time, or an independent contractor working with that company. And so there's separate laws and rules that apply, but it's not regulated through the real estate license rules. So 696 isn't really applicable to an unlicensed assistant. For a licensed assistant who is an independent contractor with a business, they would be someone that is like supervised and controlled because they are licensed and could be doing professional real estate activity. New system, if there is a supervisory agreement with a team and a supervisory person and the other agent are representing different parties on the same transaction, does that create dual agency? So Sarah, if the question is like, let's say we have a team that's comprised of 5 different people. One of them works with a buyer, a different one of them works with a seller. If they're all on the same team, operating under that team name, working as a team, then yeah, that's a disclosed limited agency situation. You'd need disclosed limited agency agreements because the team is representing multiple individuals simultaneously. This is kind of the same thing that applies to the principal broker. If your brokerage has a buyer that works with one broker in your office and a seller that works with another broker in your office, your principal broker requires a disclosed limited agency agreement to simply have the ability to like review and have oversight over the documents that are flowing through both the buyer and the seller side of that transaction. So that is simply kind of, there's like a microcosm of the same thing that now applies to teams. If your team is representing both sides of a transaction, disclosed limited agency. And disclosure that basically says, hey, heads up, we need a disclosed limited agency agreement to represent both sides of a transaction as a team. We will talk more about the supervision control thing. That is another kind of large change to the law that comes with 3137. Here we go. One of the regulations, the name of a real estate team may not include the terms realty or real estate and may not be identical to a registered business name. So these are restrictions that are found kind of like all over. Essentially what it comes down to is it started in the early 2000s. Michigan started looking into it and they said, man, these team things are absolutely unregulated and our real estate agency has no control over teams because they're not part of the statutory outlay. It was just not expected in the statute. So various states have begun adopting regulations of the concept of teams, and in each state, it basically the pole star, the direction of it is how, like, what does a consumer hear and think that's a company that does real estate? And in some states, that's the word associates, it's brokerage, it's realty, it's real estate. In Oregon, the terms that have been chosen are realty and real estate. Basically, the argument is when something is called ABC Realty, even if it's a group or a team, it sounds like a company. And so the consumer should not be interfacing with something that is not a company, but is, for all intents and purposes, coming off as a company in name. So as a result, the name of the team cannot include the terms realty or real estate, and it needs to be something other than a presently registered business name. Real estate services, I believe, would also be counted under this because it has the term real estate in it. Even though we don't like it wouldn't bundle the terms in that one. So, you know, like you could say like realty group or something like that. And like, it's not realty, it's realty group, but it's treated as functionally identical. Is there a fine schedule? This change is going to be ridiculously expensive, not only with branding and marketing. I believe OREA is trying to come up with an effective solution that allows people with kind of the time and flexibility to make the change. But into the future, this is essentially kind of, this is the lay of the land. So there is, like, OREA doesn't want to just smash people where possible. They would like to work with folks, but ultimately this is what the law is at this stage now. So there may be some flexibility, there may be some sort of an off-ramp or an on-ramp onto this, but ultimately this, like, into the future, this is how it's going to be. There were similar kind of disputes and concerns that existed in Washington when it changed its set of laws in the early 2010s. And the argument is essentially like, well, into the future, this is not going to be something that is happening. And for folks that are currently doing this, I don't necessarily encourage you to just like violate administrative rules or law and just say like, I'll wing it. Because you're essentially kind of like marching down the highway in dark clothing and hoping a car doesn't hit you. It doesn't mean you won't get hit by a car, but it means it's a bad idea. So just be aware, this is the law as it stands. So like, I don't encourage people to violate that. Help us understand why this law came into effect, for why real estate cannot be used in a team name. It's so confusing to the public and will cost community $10,000, possibly more. Rebranding websites, all those things, not beneficial to anyone. Our businesses are companies. I joined to national brands in one case. Their fine schedule is ridiculous. Concern is that it may expand over time. Theoretically, this is not like an intent to fearmonger or anything like that, but the law is able to change. And if it is something where, for instance, consumers are running into problems where people are all calling themselves like the home service or something like that, rather than realty or real estate, it is possible that it changes into the future. That is not to say that it's going to, but just that it could in the future, because law is a fungible, it's a malleable thing. So just be aware. The idea behind it is transparency. So as long as consumers are made aware, and with changes as well, where you have to provide various disclosures and say like, this is a team, our team is working in the following way with the following people, you won't necessarily have as much confusion or as much of a problem with like absolute lack of transparency within the concept of team. And as a result, likely there is not going to be a huge amount of movement, but that's not a guarantee, that's an opinion. Previous OREA rules required team in a team name, didn't they? That seemed pretty clear. There were OREA rules, so it was specifically OAR 863015012 subsection 7 was in the advertising rules, and it said if you are advertising and you use the word team or the word group, At that point, additional requirements apply that basically say like your team has to do the follow, has to follow the following things. And it sort of slid regulation on teams in through the terms team and group within an advertising, but administrative rule is not inherently the place where a regulatory body is supposed to be encouraging those sort of changes. And there are a fair number of other states where they were trying to regulate teams through advertising rules, and in most of those states the response is essentially like there's got to be a better way to do it than to kind of slide regulation in through the side on a rule that has nothing to do with the actual team itself, rather is just about advertising and clarity in advertisement. Advised by OREA that teams or groups need to have, teams have to have the word group or team in their name. That is not necessarily true. I don't know where that would have come from OREA, but based on the way that the law is written, that's not inherently required. If you do run a team and you're calling it such and such team and you have team in the name, there are additional regulations that apply. Will URLs be included in this, social media handles and whatnot? Social media handles, I believe, would be considered part of advertising, and so presumably when OREA makes rule changes, they're also going to change the advertising rules to map up more closely with this regulation on teams, because for all time until now, OREA had nothing to kind of clip any of their team regulations into. With the update to advertising rules, we'll see. Presumably something to the effect of social media is going to be considered an element of this, and if you have something like a social media thing that it links you to your original website and your original website has no issues, I can't speak for how OREA is going to see it, but the way that they've previously said it is if your like home landing page from a website that attaches to a social media post or a social media link has certain words, then it's fine as long as it's compliant, but we await to see what the rule changes are on the advertising rules. Does it mean I cannot use my team name for marketing materials? I'm currently using my first and last name and with the word real estate group as my team name. Yeah, Tammy's got an answer on that. Question is, so if we change every name, email, website, etc., eliminate real estate and realty, we choose home, properties, brokers, how do we know that it won't get changed again in the future? What can we even call our teams? So this is presumably the rules as they exist here will not change unless there is some significant reason that arises. Other states have chosen words like brokerage and associates and realtor and things like that, and they have said these words can't be used as well. There's at least one group, state rather, that says you can't use the word group. But Oregon is not one of those states. Can I predict the future and tell you what will change or will not change? No, I cannot. If the concern is what if the future changes these rules whatsoever, what can I call my team? The other option is you can register a business and just strike out as a business and have whatever that name is. If you have a business, I could call ABC Realty Team, like have that be my business name and register with it or OREA. And that is no longer me operating as a real estate team. That is me operating as a real estate brokerage. I'm not operating as a name other than the real estate brokerage's name. So ABC Realty is totally fine if it's registered with OREA. That's not a team. The problem begins to arise, and where this regulation on the term and the title comes up is when it is you using a term that is separate from the registered business name, rather than ABC Realty, which is the main company. You have Realty Group. That's not registered with OREA. There is no kind of paper trail back to OREA that connects that. That is where the term is not usable. But you can theoretically register a business and have a business that is registered with OREA that uses that name. It would not be associated with your brokerage at present. So there are certain structural and strategic questions you may have in play. But if it is registered with OREA, this rule on teams doesn't apply, because a team is a group that is not a registered name. It's using something other than the registered name. We'll come back to some of these other ones. We can probably spend a while on this exact concept, so we will return to it, I promise. There is time at the end where we'll talk about it again, but let's try and hit some of the other changes with 3137, because there are some big things specifically with supervision and control as well. Worth noting this last subsection 6 as well. Real estate team treated as a singular entity for disclosed limited agency purposes. If your team is like insular unit team is working with multiple people at both sides of a transaction, disclosed limited agency agreements should be in place in the same way that your brokerage requires it. So the supervising principal broker, the managing principal broker is able to review and control and all this stuff they're supposed to do with that transaction. The team will need the same things in place if it is working with people across the board. There is a change to 696-290, that's the commission sharing thing, that says a real estate licensee may offer, promise, allow, give, pay, rebate, directly, indirectly, all parts or shares of your compensation that arises or accrues from a real estate transaction. You can do all that stuff to a charitable organization that is a 501c3 organization under the IRS code. So there were previously quite a few programs that were 501c3s that were like Homes for Heroes and things like that. The whole point of the program was that you could divert your commission into paying for helping a charity, and it was literally against 696-290. The change now allows 501c3s to be exempted from the like commission sharing restrictions. This does encourage you to basically ask if the charity, if you want to send your commission over to a charitable organization, you got to ask them, like, are you a 501c3 company? Because if you're not a 501c3, that's a problem. Like, this doesn't apply. So like, for example, the Oregon Realtors, the association, we are a 501c6 organization. You cannot share your commission with us. I know you would like to, especially after this lovely training, but we're not within this realm because we're not a 501c3, but something like, for example, the Home Foundation or Homes for Heroes, all these other ones that are 501c6 or c3 organizations, totally allowed. Now there are, I would say just generally, like, if you're going to share commission, ask the company first, hey, what is your charitable status? Are you a 501c3? Most of them will be, but like the Association of Odd Fellows and other groups are going to be separate. They're going to be their own separate things. So just be aware, 501c3s only, that's the extension on this for what you can share commission with. There is an additional penalty added under 696-301. 696-301 basically says, here's all the stuff that the commissioner can punish people for. It includes various things like, for instance, interfering with another person's exclusive agency relationship, interfering with contracts that someone has formed that are exclusive with another party. It includes violating any piece of 696 as well as several other chapters. It basically just says, here's all the stuff the real estate commissioner can punish for. And there's a piece added to it, which is technically gilding the lily because there is a kitchen sink addition to the 696-301 that just says, like, did you violate any part of 696? Well, that's a problem. But instead, subsection 16 is added that says, if you are a managing principal broker, failure to exercise reasonable supervision and control over the activities of your associated real estate licensees is a punishable offense. So if you are a managing principal broker, supervision and control is obligated. Now that was the case beforehand, and that was technically under 696-301, but putting it here makes it less open to interpretation, and essentially it just says if you're a managing broker, you have to supervise and control the people you work with because that's part of your role as a managing principal broker. So then we get to supervision and control. This one is largely targeted if you are a managing principal broker. This is very relevant to you. If you start your own company, this is relevant to you. If you are in charge of a team, this is potentially relevant to you. What does it mean to manage and supervise? So previously the chapter just, 696 had nothing that really defined supervision and control. There were just pieces of it that said something to the effect of the principal broker needs to supervise and control, and then said nothing else. So there is additional clarity added to this, essentially what it means to supervise and control. A managing principal broker shall exercise reasonable supervision and control over the activities of their brokers and the principal brokers that are associated with them. If you start a company, these various folks that are associated with you, that are practicing real estate under the name of your company registered with OREA, you got to supervise and control. And what does it mean? It's reasonable supervision and control includes, but is not limited to, establishment and enforcement of written policy, procedures, and systems that do all of the following things, including these things. So review and manage professional real estate activities of associated brokers, review and manage usage of disclosure forms and contracts, manage document filing and storage, manage handling of client trust funds, manage usage of unlicensed assistance by associated brokers, educate associated brokers on federal, state, and local laws relating to practice of real estate, review and inspect documents that may have a material effect on the rights or obligations of a party to a transaction, and ensure that all of your various associated licensees have active real estate licenses if they're doing professional real estate activity. So this is included. That means supervision and control, reasonable supervision and control is this plus other stuff potentially if it is reasonable and kind of within the understandable ambit of that. But broadly speaking, what this says is if you are a managing principal broker, you should have policies within your brokerage that allows you to tell someone very directly, here's the way we handle all of these things. Hey, you've got a transaction that involves client trust funds. Here's how we handle client trust funds in our brokerage. Here is the policy. And then your role is to essentially say, did you follow the policy? You're ensuring compliance with the policy. There is an obligation within your brokerage that you should manage the usage of unlicensed assistance by associated brokers. That can be you're allowed to use unlicensed assistance. Hire away. We're fine with it in our brokerage, but you should have something there. Essentially, any of these spaces that you have in this little list, you should have some policy within your brokerage that explains what your stance is on these various things and how you enforce it and how you ensure that this occurs. Many of these are not changes. I would like to mention as well, like many of these are not changes from how most brokerages operate, but just be aware, like your office policies may need to be made a little bit more robust to explain certain things, like how am I going to ensure that my brokers understand state, federal, and local laws related to real estate in practice? We do a Thursday training. That's how I ensure that this happens. That's my reasonable control over this item. Subsection 2, a managing broker, I don't have that one highlighted, but subsection 2 is the managing principal broker shall establish a system for monitoring compliance with these various statutes, rules, and whatnots and policies. So, if you just have a policy in place, that's cool, but you also need some sort of a system to explain how you are ensuring that that policy is followed. That in large part is kind of it's becoming more of the norm in employment law and employment standards. This is not saying this is an employment law thing, but just in the legal world, usually when we say something like you need to have a policy in place that does X, up until recently that was just like, have a policy, you're good. Nowadays, what the laws end up saying in most cases is have a policy, and if you're not following your own policy, you don't get the shield of having the policy in the first place. So if you're going to put a policy in place that says this is how we handle unlicensed assistants and somebody breaches that policy, what do? What if you say no unlicensed assistants in our office, it makes me uncomfortable, and one of your brokers hires an unlicensed assistant to do something, what do? Your brokerage should have some kind of an idea of what they do. The managing principal broker, subsection 3, also not highlighted. The managing principal broker is responsible for the acts of all associated brokers related to professional real estate activities and performed while a licensee's license is associated with the managing principal broker. The buck stops with the managing principal broker. If something goes wrong and the managing principal broker's management was supposed to catch that, that is ultimately something that says that is the managing principal broker who is responsible for that problem that occurs. This does potentially change the way that supervision and control is executed. Previously, one of the administrative rules just said you got to look at the documents within 7 days of when they were made. And that functionally meant that there could be many transactions that would happen, and then the transaction would be well underway, and then it would get looked at. You're probably going to need to change that practice to have the document review happen before contracting is completed or fully facilitated, essentially because the managing principal broker is the one that is responsible for the certain amount of the responsibility of what's going on. Managing principal broker, subsection 4, managing principal broker may allocate some or all of their supervisory control and responsibility requirements to a principal real estate broker who is associated with the brokerage through a written supervisory agreement as is described in 696.310. So basically, you can delegate. You have management and control responsibilities as a managing principal broker. If you register the business, you are in charge. However, you can delegate those responsibilities to other principal brokers in your office with supervisory agreements under 696.310. And then the last section is this does not apply to managing principal brokers who are maintaining a single office or are not associated with other real estate licensees. If you're a one-man shop, you don't need to have a policy telling you how you regulate your own actions because it's just you. That's fine. So and you could even have an office that has a handful of unlicensed assistants. That's fine. It's once you start having another like direct report who is also a licensee, a registered licensee with OREA, at that stage you have a requirement for supervision, control, and policies to be in place. So if you're just doing like the one-person office, these regulations that say like you got to have a policy in place that tells us how you do the various things, that's not going to apply. And then 310, this is kind of a sister component of that supervision and control. This is the portion of the statute that talks about supervision and control agreements. Previously, the way that this was written is if there were two principal brokers at a brokerage at any given time, then you had to have written supervision agreements between those two principal brokers. And so if you had an office that was you as a principal broker who was managing the thing and one other broker, and you've been working together for 20 years, and the other broker is like, for my own personal edification, I want to get my PB license because I think I'm good at this. And they get their PB license. As soon as they got their license, you were supposed to like slam a contract in front of them and explain how you separated control and ownership of the brokerage and things like that. And that's just kind of not how business operates these days. Instead, what it's been changed to is something more akin to if you have another principal broker who wishes to begin exerting control over the brokerage, then you need one of these agreements. So the default stance is not you have to have a principal or one of these shared control agreements in place at all times. Instead, the default is you only need a shared supervision and control agreement if someone else wishes to share supervision and control over the brokerage. There are various other things that change on this. So this is what I've jumped across is just everything below what you see here. There was supposed to be a nice transition, but I was failing on my PowerPoint when I set that up. So the next set of stuff that happens is there is a requirement for any supervisory control and responsibility. You have to include the supervisory and responsibility for control of one principal broker over another principal broker in the event that you have multiple principal brokers who are doing supervision at any given time. So in your brokerage, let's say you are the managing principal broker, you have another person you've delegated all of the property management stuff to, and then another person comes up and says, I also want to be a managing principal, like to supervise and control pieces of this brokerage, and you split the residential transaction supervision control between you and that other person. At that point, there is a requirement that you have some sort of an explanation of what control each of these sub-principal brokers who are exerting control, what control they have over one another. So if one of them is in charge, like let's say you delegate all authority in the brokerage to one broker, and then they've also got some delegation to another person, but ultimately all responsibility flows up to someone, you need to explain within those supervision control agreements who is in charge. Like imagine there's an org chart. Are all of you in a line, or are you all level and even and you exert kind of independent control over elements of the brokerage? Include that in the supervision and control agreements. You need to have a succession plan. Within your supervision and control agreements, there should be something in that agreement that explains what happens if the guy in charge dies or is incapacitated or is inactivated or their license expires or they quit and fire or work somewhere. What does the company do when the head gets cut off? That should be somewhere in there. A succession plan is never defined within the statute, so use your imagination, but basically plan for the scenario where something goes tragically wrong. The way that it's unfortunate, but the way that certain estate planning attorneys describe these sort of things is this is the bus crash plan. What happens if all of the people that matter in the C-suite are in a bus crash at the same time? What happens at that point? What do you do? So your plans, your supervision and control agreements should express, okay, if all of this falls apart, John takes control. If we lose these 4 people, then Susan is in control. You would explain who's in charge of what at given times based on what happens. You need to, so subsection F, expressly state that the managing principal broker's responsibility for professional real estate activities is not limited by the supervision agreement. So ultimately, if you're the managing principal broker, the buck still does stop with you as the person that registered the company. So you can delegate authority, but responsibility doesn't get delegated. So it's not a compartmentalization of liability for the managing principal broker, but rather a compartmentalization of obligation. The liability still remains, or the responsibility rather, remains with the managing principal broker at the end of the day. You do need to update your supervisory agreements if something happens that adds another person into the process. It's now mandatory that you like include some sort of an update. So like, hey, everybody that's in charge of the company, we're adding John in. So here's how this is going to change. Susan, you used to be in charge of 50% of our brokers. Now you're in charge of 33% of our brokers because you, John, and I are all sharing the brokers together. You would then update that supervision agreement across the board with all people who do supervision. There are identical rules that apply to property managers as well. This is a separate part of the statute, but essentially the same thing is true for property management. If you are a property manager, you can allocate or like spread the authority or the responsibility for who manages what within the company. Now, with that said, you also need a succession plan. You also need to have some sort of an agreement that says like, here's who's in charge of who when we're doing this delegation, but it's all functionally the same stuff for property managers as well. Further change, 696385 has additions to the subsection that says OREA has to make available to all real estate licensees free of charge training material on rules and laws the agency is charged with carrying out and enforcing. It basically says this is one of their discretionary authorities. It is permissive, but it's hopefully a cattle prod that encourages OREA to produce more training material on how it interprets the laws and rules, because right now if you send an email to OREA, many times you'll get a response that says, here's a literal block quote from the statute, you're welcome. And it would be really nice to have actual like guidance on some of that information where they are the enforcement body. So what we're seeing instead then is a first step towards saying OREA provide actual guidance on statute and rule. The same is true for a later section of the chapter on what they do with like what OREA has the authority to do and what the commissioner can do. Basically, the commissioner can delegate authority and reassign staff as necessary to, including other things, create model advertisements, to create model procedures, model record-keeping practices, review advertisements and promotional activities of licensees. You could say, like theoretically, the commissioner has the authority to assign a staff person to do review of advertisements to say yes, that's compliant or no, that's not compliant. Theoretically, they could do that. Now, has a staff person been reassigned? Not yet. This doesn't go into effect until 2026. I doubt we would see staff reassignment, if anything, until sometime later on in 2026. So this is prospective, it's hopeful, it's aspirational, but it's not changing anything at present. It just says, OREA, would you please, one of your things that you can do very expressly is finally explain how you actually enforce some of these rules so that we know what we're supposed to do with like a more direct version of it. The last piece is there is a rulemaking that is presently taking place. There will be a public hearing on September 15th at 10 a.m. You can find drafts of the rules that they are proposing online. I believe I saw earlier that someone else popped that into the chat, so this similar information is somewhere in the chat. But it's generally encouraged to be a part of civilian democracy, and commentary is how agencies change things and whatnot. So like that's very, very encouraged. If you have thoughts, if you would like to be a part of it, you can provide commentary. That is your right as an Oregonian. Those are changes. So I'm going to start going back through the questions in the chat and see what all I have missed. So let's see. Obligated supervision control, love to see it. Please clarify a referral fee. Can that only be going to a 501c3? So the 501c3 share, let's see what other people said. It might have already been answered. Not a referral fee. You can donate to a commission directly. Yes, 501c3. Yeah. So your commission can be shared with a 501c3. It's not necessarily referrals. It's just previously you couldn't share your commission with an unlicensed individual outside of very narrow walls. There is now an opening in that wall that says if you get your commission before you even like receive it and have it as a private individual that can do what you want with your money, you can have your commission diverted to a 501c3 as a way of sharing your commission with that nonprofit. That's something that is permissible under.
What do you need? You're wrong.
Were there specific instances of groups of brokers who were using real estate or realty in their team name, or using a proper bad thing? So that's one of those places where I would generally encourage us away from ever talking about something like that within a training that has competitors and businesses in the same training together. That becomes an antitrust landmine where if I like call out one company, I'm like, this company did it wrong, then it becomes the potential for someone to argue that the association through its authority and through like its capacity to make you all gather together and have opinions together is restricting business practices of one brokerage or is like slamming down on one brokerage. So we're not going to name names. We're not going to call out groups. We're not going to do anything like that. That is not something that we should ever do in one of these forums, because that's how we get into antitrust trouble, and antitrust lawsuits are awful. You can send OREA public comments. Yes. Email address. All right, has a rural resources, rules resources. Cool. Do you anticipate supervision control sections to go further with new licensees as they do in Washington? The law in Washington states during the first 2 years of a broker's licensing, the managing principal broker must provide a heightened level of supervision. Possibly, potentially, it could happen. It's not something that I'm saying like, yes, it will or no, it won't, but it could. This is sort of an opinion statement just based on the fact that I think in part I'm a Washingtonian originally, but it seems like many of the things that Washington does, Oregon does a little later on. So it very well could happen because Washington does exert a certain amount of influence over the state of Oregon. But I wouldn't necessarily guarantee that. One of the elements of this as well is because there's going to be an additional proficiency examination at the end of your first year renewal. It's possible that there will be a situation where you go like, it's been solved. We don't need heightened scrutiny of the first 2 years, we'll see is the simple answer. Did I just say that documents are supposed to be PV reviewed after a single client has signed rather than when both buyer or seller have signed? So there's a regulation in the OARs. There's a requirement that a document review occurs within 7 days after the document is, I believe it's after it's created, not after it is signed. But I'm just naming that off the dome. I'd have to pull up the exact administrative rule, but there was essentially like there was a 7 day timeline on when review had to occur. And what you could have happen is contracts would be entered and then review would happen sometime later on. And that's probably not sufficient anymore because you have a requirement. Essentially the risk to the managing broker is relatively expressed now because they were supposed to exert control and review and supervision over the stuff that's happening. What do you want us to get our documents approved before we send them to our clients for signature? I'm not requiring it. I'm not even saying that it's required by law. I'm saying your managing principal broker would probably appreciate it. In the same way that like every brokerage is its own business and can do largely what they wish and have like a relatively large amount of freedom in what they can and cannot do. Brokerages can make decisions how they wish, and the more or less they want to manage risk, they can do those sort of things. So it's not necessarily something that says like you have to send it to your PB, but generally speaking, from a risk management perspective, as a principal broker that now has an express thing that says the failure to supervise and control the actions of your associated brokers is ultimately on you because you're the managing guy. That encourages more oversight at an earlier stage rather than a later stage because it's prophylactic rather than responsive. For help in making sure the supervisory agreements and role disclosure are compliant, who can we go to? In those situations, I would generally encourage contacting the association if you have questions, contacting a principal broker. If you are a principal broker and you're writing one of those, then that doesn't help much. The legal hotline can provide broad commentary on the law side of things. You can always just contact like an attorney of your own and have them draft these things, and then they're essentially obligated to make it compliant with the law because that's what you're paying them for. In theory, you could ask OREA, and OREA now has this permissive standard that says we can totally explain stuff to you because it's part of our job, but I can't guarantee that OREA will because that permissive standard has not become required yet. It's not something that says OREA, if someone asks you to review a supervision agreement, you have to look at it. Instead, it says OREA, if you have the resources and you want to assign somebody to reviewing these things, you can. So we'll see. I would love to see OREA assign staff that literally is in charge of like reviewing documentation for compliance with statutory and regulatory standards. I haven't seen it yet. OREA's response, we can't interpret and intend the law, but we write and enforce. Sorry, please call a lawyer. I have called for, okay, it's more on OREA stuff. On when a brokerage leaves, PB broker does not own all contracts. Can we go back one slide? Sam, which slide did you want me to go back to? This one, I'm guessing this one. Hopefully this one. Yes, yeah, it is not clickable on a Zoom meeting. So let me actually, Kelly, if you're there. I can.
It's me. What can I do?
I'm just gonna type it out in the chat so people can. All right. It's not ideal, but you can theoretically copy and paste that into a anything along the lines of like a Google Chrome or Safari or whatever, and it'll be there. So where was it? Last slide. All these new regulations and requirements and management of the workers bring us closer and closer to the elimination of independent contractor status. So independent contractor status is still established. It's not destroyed or removed in any substantial way. There is a kind of special carve outs on independent contracting that always exist in the various spaces of law. I believe there's like 1 or 2 places where it doesn't exist at federal level, but independent contracting still exists as the way that this is operated. It instead just changes the way that its managing principal broker is supposed to supervise people that are associating with their license. And that does it. It's not elimination of independent contractor status is kind of the broad explanation on that. Said before, when these go into effect January 1st, 2026. However, OREA in its rulemaking may be allowed to put some sort of an on-ramp or off-ramp on certain things that are occurring within their rulemaking changes, but effective date of all of these law changes, House Bill 3137, January 1st, 26. Kind of as way of explanation, in legislature, they can tell you when something goes into effect. If they don't tell you, it goes into effect on the 1st of January the next year. And in this case, it didn't have an explicit date that said like, this happens today. If they put something like an emergency clause in it, it would happen immediately, but that wasn't the case in this situation. How does this affect a third-party transacting coordinator when they are licensed agents under the same brokerage as the agents they are serving? How about a licensed TC working with the brokers in other brokerages but providing services that do not require a license? There are some very unanswered questions about the licensed transaction coordinator that operates as a licensed transaction coordinator within one brokerage and then operates as an unlicensed transaction coordinator within another office. I don't necessarily have like the bandwidth to be able to opine exactly on it, but functionally the question at play is questions of confidentiality and access. If I am a licensed transaction coordinator with one brokerage working with their clients on things that are privileged or confidential, and then I move to another brokerage and work on things with potentially the opposite side of the transaction, I can't form a disclosed limited agency agreement because the brokerages are separate, but there's this weird question of independent contracting that at present is really not answered, and my general understanding is it probably could create some serious problems in that situation, but that needs more unpacking than I think, and it's not addressed in this situation, so I don't have a great answer at present. That's not just me making things up off the top of my head. If you have your own company with real estate in the name, you have no assistants, don't supervise any of it, it's just you don't need to change your company name. If it's registered with OREA, it's not a team. Even though it has real estate in the name, it's just the company. It's the regulation on the words team or realty are for teams, or real estate or realty are for teams specifically. And in that context, even if you had like a group that was ABC Realty Team and that was the name of your registered company, that's just the registered name. It's not a team under Oregon's law definition because it has been registered with the agency. Team in this context and all the regulation that applies is just a group that is not doing professional real estate under a registered name, but is still somehow associated with a registered name. Now, theoretically, there could have been some much more unwieldy definition that was put in the law, but I don't know much, like other than saying like under certain circumstances, it's a team. You could even call yourself a team and you're not a team, or you could not call yourself a team and still be a team. It's a matter of law. Like we can potentially find better definitions or better ways of kind of parsing it down and saying this is like an unregistered company operating under professional real estate activity, but it would get more and more unwieldy. And so the definitions within that section are just applied how they are. And that's just kind of how we operate. So real estate realty only applies to team. And when I say team, I mean subsection of a brokerage not registered with OREA that is otherwise using a name that is not the registered name. As an Oregon principal real estate broker, you have 7 banking days to review each document of agreement generated in a real estate transaction after it has been accepted, rejected, or withdrawn. There we go. So it doesn't have to be signed, just accepted, rejected, or withdrawn. In theory, if you withdraw it, you still have 7 days afterwards to look at it. Business is always changing. Will the recordings be available to watch? I believe we are recording this one, so I think so. I am not gonna. Kelly's in charge of the recordings, and that's what we'll see next. Nicholas had a question. If the team uses a URL that includes the words realty or real estate in the URL, not the team name, just the URL, will they need to change that? I believe that falls within the category of advertising rules, but it's kind of a broad application of the term advertising. This is where the laws and regulations have not really caught up to the digital era yet, because theoretically the URL is a piece of the advertising itself. Like webuyhomes.com tells you something about what it is. In the same way that you could go to like Zillow.com, and Zillow doesn't mean anything. It's like a Dr. Seuss word, so it doesn't mean anything. So there's like this open question about whether the URL is part of advertising or not. And I don't know if that's ever been given like an official answer from OREA's side. So my answer from the risk management side is assume and err on the side of caution and say anything that's consumer facing that you're like putting out there as with that's supposed to have some sort of meaning or supposed to gather people to you, that's advertising. When in doubt, disclose. It's a good answer. Branch office is managed by one that is not a licensed principal broker. The brokers in the branch are referred to, or the licensed principal broker at another branch. Just curious about the supervision agreement. There is no inherent requirement that a branch office have like someone manning the portcullis at the front at all times. A branch office is simply an administrative like breakdown of places OREA allows you to run business. There are changes on how you have to hold records and keep records, where you can keep special records in branch offices or in the main office, and so it means something. But broadly speaking, if there's someone that like sweeps up the messes in the branch office, that doesn't make them the supervising, controlling broker of the branch office. If you delegate authority and say like, John, you are in charge of everything that happens in the office on Main Street, now you have that supervision agreement that would need to be in place that basically would delegate all professional real estate activities occurring in office on Main Street belongs to John. John's the one that's doing that stuff. Where would you go if you wanted to attend the public meeting? I think all of the rulemaking things are done digitally these days. I don't know if OREA actually has like an open room that people can go to anymore. That may just mean me assuming that, because they very well could, but my understanding is most of the time it's done through some sort of a digital forum now. So there would probably be a website link. The link I sent doesn't open, that is correct. You're gonna have to copy and paste it. I did not send the full link, that is my bad. Rosie sent it, I appreciate it. Thank you. Draft rules, repost, and test prior to sharing. Oh yeah, okay. So that's what we got. We are 8 minutes past what we needed. If people have other questions or more questions, I am happy to stay on and answer them, but we have already like done our hour, we've done our stuff. You are free to go. We will try and send, I'll talk with Kelly. I think we're gonna send out the recording as well, or a link to it or something along those lines. So there should be something at the end of the day on this. Not the end of today, but at some point there should be something on this.